One company just outsold Tesla in electric vehicles, and almost no one saw it happen. It was not a legacy automaker. It was not a Silicon Valley startup. Most people in the West cannot fully explain who it is or where it came from. And that gap between how invisible this happened and how completely it changed everything is the most important story in the automotive world right now. The company is BYD. And it starts not with cars, not with China's industrial strategy. It starts with a 29-year-old walking away from a government salary with nothing but a chemistry degree and $300,000 that were not his. The year is 1995. China has no serious domestic car industry. Foreign automakers control the market. Wang Chuanfu borrows from a cousin, quits his government research job, and opens a battery factory in Shenzhen. No automotive experience, no manufacturing background, no obvious reason this should work. He names the company Build Your Dreams. The industry does not take notice. It should have. He is not building anything original at first. He is reverse engineering what Japanese companies are selling. Sanyo, Sony, the dominant players, and doing it for a fraction of the cost. While those competitors pour tens of millions into automated production lines, Wang breaks manufacturing into hundreds of individual steps performed by hand. In Shenzhen, where labor costs are near zero, this is not a disadvantage. It is a structural edge no one else is willing to build. Within 4 years, BYD controls over 10% of the global rechargeable battery market. By 2002, it is listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. 7 years old, already worth billions. But here is what the headline does not say. The foundation of that success was already under legal attack, and the outcome of that attack would determine whether there was a future at all. In 2003, Sanyo filed a lawsuit. The allegations were precise. Sanyo claimed BYD had hired away its engineers, obtained confidential design documents, and used that information to copy products that took Sanyo years and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. If those claims held in court, BYD faced injunctions blocking it from selling batteries in its most important international markets. The entire business model was in jeopardy. Most CEOs in that position would have gone quiet, focused on the defense, protected what they had. Wang Chuanfu did the opposite. In the middle of active litigation with one of the most powerful electronics companies in the world, he announced that BYD was acquiring a bankrupt Chinese automaker, a company with no cars, no engineers, no supply chain, nothing that makes an automotive business function. BYD stock dropped 17% in a single day. One prominent Hong Kong fund manager went on the record and said that if Wang followed through, he would eat his shoes. Not a metaphor, an actual promise. Wang followed through anyway. Investors thought it was reckless. They were not entirely wrong. It should have failed. It did not, because Wang was not buying a car company. He was buying a container, something to fill with the one thing he already understood better than almost anyone alive: batteries. He had seen what no one else was willing to admit. China was about to open its auto market to foreign competition in a way that would destabilize everything. The only way to survive long-term was to control the full stack, from the cell to the chassis. The acquisition was not a mistake. It was the entire strategy. The only question was whether BYD could survive long enough to execute it. It almost did not. The first BYD car was the F3, launched in 2005. It was not original. It was a near-exact copy of the Toyota Corolla. The visual similarity was so precise that photographs of the two vehicles side by side were nearly indistinguishable. Toyota noticed, the global press noticed, but design patent enforcement in China at the time was weak. BYD pressed forward and let price do the work. A Corolla cost the equivalent of $15,000 in China. The F3 came in under $10,000. For a country where car ownership was still out of reach for most families, that gap was the entire argument. The F3 became the best-selling car in China in 2009. But the F3 was not the bet that mattered. The bet that mattered was the F3DM, and the F3DM nearly ended everything. Launched in December 2008, the F3DM was the world's first mass-produced plug-in hybrid. The claim was extraordinary. BYD said it could run on battery power alone for up to 100 kilometers before the gasoline engine engaged, though that figure assumed a constant speed unlikely to reflect real-world driving. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway invested $232 million in late 2008, taking a roughly 10% stake. Charlie Munger called Wang Chuanfu a combination of Thomas Edison and Jack Welch. The Western press ran with it. BYD was suddenly the future. Then the future started failing in real conditions. Fleet customers receiving early F3DM units reported serious performance gaps that the spec sheet had not prepared them for. In independent testing, battery charge dropped from full to 88% after just 2 miles of electric driving, far short of the advertised range. Sales in the first year reached only 48 vehicles, against a company target of 2,000 per month. The charging infrastructure BYD had promised was not materializing on schedule. Operators who had committed to the platform based on BYD's stated specifications were discovering the technology could not deliver under pressure. Because of the limited rollout, the public damage was contained. But inside the automotive and investment world, the credibility of BYD's core technology claim was being questioned out loud. Loudly. The legal exposure was not going away either. In 2006, a separate lawsuit had emerged in California alleging misappropriation of trade secrets tied to a former employee. 2 active legal threats, a product under performance scrutiny, a reputation built on promises the hardware was not yet keeping. And then something happened that none of it had prepared the company for. The factory exploded. In 2010, a blast and fire tore through a BYD battery production facility in Shenzhen. Workers were injured. Regulators moved in. The incident opened a window into the conditions inside BYD's manufacturing operations. The densely packed, labor-intensive lines that had made BYD cost competitive were now under official examination. Chinese industrial safety had become politically volatile after a series of high-profile accidents across the country. The company managed the regulatory exposure before it became a formal shutdown. But the warning was real. BYD was growing faster than its infrastructure could safely support. For a moment, it looked over. The market made it worse. Between 2011 and 2013, BYD's profits collapsed. Net profit fell by as much as 94% year over year, at its worst point, as a slumping domestic market dragged down demand across vehicles, mobile parts, and solar cells simultaneously. The company had built out a dealership network across China on the assumption that explosive growth would continue. When the growth rate moderated, BYD was holding a retail infrastructure it could not support. Dealers closed. Inventory accumulated. The stock fell sharply from its post-Buffett highs, shedding a large portion of its peak value over the restructuring period. Wang Chuanfu went on record admitting the expansion had been too aggressive. For a man who had never publicly conceded a strategic error, it landed hard. The company restructured. Dealerships cut. Headcount reduced. The cost discipline of the battery years reimposed across the entire business. By this point, most companies would have been finished. The legal exposure, the product failures, the factory explosion, the profit collapse. Any one of these might have ended a lesser operation. All of them together should have been unsurvivable. BYD was not finished, not even close. Rather than retreat, Wang moved into new territory. BYD launched a utility-scale energy storage division targeting power grids. It expanded into solar panel manufacturing. It began building its own semiconductor chips for vehicle systems. It developed a new proprietary EV architecture from the ground up. And in March 2020, it unveiled a battery technology that no one in the industry had fully anticipated. The Blade battery. Not a marginal improvement, a structural reinvention. BYD eliminated the conventional modular packaging and inserted long, flat lithium iron phosphate cells directly into the chassis of the battery pack. The result was higher space utilization, a stronger structural frame, and a thermal profile that changed what was considered possible. Then BYD ran the nail penetration test. Drive a steel nail through a conventional lithium-ion battery cell, and you get thermal runaway, heat, fire, sometimes an explosion. BYD drove the nail through the Blade battery and filmed it. The battery emitted no smoke, no fire, and its surface temperature reached only 30 to 60 degrees Celsius. They released the footage publicly. It was watched tens of millions of times. The fire problem. The single most commercially damaging liability in the entire EV industry. The issue that had spooked fleet operators, insurance companies, and regulators for years. BYD had addressed it, using chemistry that cost less than what Tesla was building with. The automotive world paused. Then Tesla moved. For years, Tesla had argued that lithium iron phosphate was a lower density chemistry with limitations for long-range applications. In October 2021, Tesla announced in its third quarter earnings report that it would transition all standard range Model 3 and Model Y vehicles globally to lithium iron phosphate cells. The reversal was contained in a shareholder document, but its meaning was not. The chemistry competitors had questioned was now the stated direction for the world's most valuable car company. BYD said nothing. It just kept selling. In the fourth quarter of 2023, BYD outsold Tesla in global fully electric vehicle deliveries for the first time. BYD shipped 526,000 battery electric vehicles in the quarter. Tesla delivered 484,000. One quarter, one number. But it landed like a signal that could not be ignored. The company that Wall Street had spent years treating as a government-supported anomaly had just beaten the most celebrated EV manufacturer on the planet. In 2023, BYD sold nearly 1.6 million fully electric vehicles and over 3 million vehicles in total, including hybrids. The total made BYD the best-selling new energy vehicle company in the world for the second consecutive year. This was no longer a projection, this was a pattern. But this is the part that makes people uncomfortable. BYD's rise did not happen in isolation. The question of how much of it was earned and how much of it was structurally enabled by a government with unlimited resources and a 30-year plan has become the central fault line in global trade policy. BYD received substantial state support from the Chinese government. This is documented, not disputed. Direct subsidies to EV buyers, preferential lending to manufacturers, tax incentives across the supply chain, government mandates steering fleet operators toward domestic electric vehicles, infrastructure investment in charging networks at a scale that dismantled one of the core barriers to EV adoption. BYD alone received an estimated 2.1 billion euros in direct government subsidies in 2022, according to European Commission findings. Some analyses estimate total Chinese government support for its entire EV sector at hundreds of billions of dollars over 2 decades. The Chinese government disputes the framing. It points to the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States and equivalent industrial programs in Europe. The comparison is not entirely without merit. But the duration and depth of Chinese state support for BYD specifically is without precedent in the modern automotive industry, and the rest of the world eventually ran out of patience. The European Union opened a formal anti-subsidy investigation in 2023. The conclusion: Chinese EV manufacturers had received illegal state support enabling them to undercut European competitors on price. In October 2024, the EU imposed definitive additional tariffs. BYD's specific additional duty was set at 17% on top of the standard 10% vehicle import duty, bringing its total to 27%. The United States moved further. The Biden administration raised tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to 100% in 2024. The American market effectively closed. BYD did not retreat. It rewrote manufacturing investments announced in Hungary, placing BYD production inside the EU tariff boundary. A factory announced in Brazil, expansion into Thailand, sales pushed into Australia, New Zealand, across Latin America, and the Middle East. In markets without tariff walls, BYD let price do what it had always done. The price worked. Meanwhile, the industry that spent a century building itself is not handling this quietly. Volkswagen, in its 87th year, announced in September 2024 that it was considering closing German factories for the first time in its history, citing fierce competition from Chinese EV manufacturers and declining sales in its most important market. Ford disclosed an operating loss of $4.7 billion on its electric vehicle division in 2023 alone. General Motors delayed its EV targets. Stellantis lost executive leadership tied directly to its failure to compete in the segment. These are not projections. These are filed results, quarterly disclosures, the kind of numbers that do not reverse easily. It is not slowing down either. The legacy industry spent a century building moats, dealer networks, franchise law, brand equity accumulated across generations, regulatory relationships that took decades to cultivate. BYD is moving through those moats as if they are not there. Because in a market defined by battery chemistry, software, charging infrastructure, and price, the old advantages do not translate. The car has been reinvented, and the company doing the reinventing started by hand-assembling cells in a rented building in Shenzhen with borrowed money and an open lawsuit. Wang Chuanfu is now worth over $20 billion. The fund manager who promised to eat his shoes honored his word on camera. Warren Buffett gradually sold his stake over years and locked in returns that made the BYD position one of the most profitable in Berkshire's history. The Sanyo lawsuit was settled out of court. The terms were never disclosed. The tariffs may slow the Western expansion. The subsidy investigations may create lasting legal friction in Europe. Geopolitical tension may harden into barriers that no factory in Hungary can fully sidestep. Real questions remain about software depth, long-term quality consistency, and whether BYD can build the kind of brand weight in Western markets that took Toyota and BMW generations to earn. But here is what is no longer a question. The disruption is not coming. It already happened. The assumptions that protected the legacy players for a century, that EVs were too expensive, that Chinese manufacturers could not match quality, that state-backed challengers from emerging markets eventually hit a ceiling, all of it has been disproven. Systematically, publicly, in the sales data. This is not a story about a company getting lucky. BYD survived a lawsuit that should have broken it. A product failure that should have ended investor confidence. A factory explosion that should have triggered regulatory shutdown. A profit collapse that wiped out years of gains. It survived all of it. And then it came back and built the best-selling new energy vehicle operation in the world. The Western auto industry is paying attention now. Every boardroom, every trade negotiator, every regulator, all of them watching the same numbers, all of them asking the same question. But there is a problem with paying attention after the fact. You are not watching a threat approach. You are watching a transition already complete. The ground already shifted. The factories are already built. The supply chains are already running. The cars are already on the road. The only thing still catching up is everyone else. If you like our content, please like and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you next time.